Hi all, let's see how containerization is achieved using Docker and Kubernetes in this video. Before that, we'll see some primary differences between VMs and containers. So in the VMs, you have a separate operating system installed on each VM, whereas in the containers, you don't see that separate operating system. So that's the reason VM is regarded as the heavyweight, and whereas the container is lightweight because it doesn't have its own operating system installed. It just runs on the Docker engine. So that's the primary difference. And let's see the technologies that are like a foundation or like which are basis to have the containerization achieved. So I will connect dots between these technologies and show you how they help to achieve the containerization. So Docker is the main underlying technology where it hosts different containers to run on it, and whereas the Kubernetes is a management or orchestration tool which will help in managing or orchestrating different containers, right? And Google Cloud Platform, AWS, they are nothing but the cloud vendors which provide the infrastructure needed for the containerization when we talk about the cloud platform or when we talk about the cloud environment. Containerization, like let's see what is containerization. So by this diagram or by this picture we can see it's all contained in one container. Containerization is the process of packaging an application along with its required libraries, frameworks, configuration files so that it can run in various environments efficiently. So this is a simple definition. Containerization is the encapsulation of an application and its required environments. So it's packed together so that it can run efficiently in any required environment. So here in this picture we can see there is an underlying infrastructure. On top of that you have the host operating system installed, and on top of that you have the Docker engine installed, and these apps from A to F, these are all containerized applications because these applications run on each container, right? So that's the reason it is named containerized applications. Now let's see the different terms associated with Docker, right? By this picture you can see, so this is a runtime where different containers are running. So Docker is nothing but it is a runtime where you can have multiple containers running on top of it. So these are the various terms related to Docker, like Docker file, Docker image, Docker container, Docker engine. So when we heard about or when we hear about these terms, it will be a bit confusing, but here I try to give each definition of the term so that it will be clear at single slide. Docker file is nothing but it contains set of instructions on how to build a Docker image. So Docker file is nothing but it contains the instructions on how to build a Docker image. Docker image is nothing but it gets built when you run a docker build command, and to that command you will give Docker file as an input. So how to build a Docker image is all present in the Docker file, right? And using a command called docker build, by giving input as a Docker file, you build a Docker image. So Docker image is nothing but it's like a software, right? So a Docker image is a lightweight standalone executable package of software that includes everything needed to run the application. Like it contains code, runtime, system tools, system libraries, and settings. So this term can be synonym for the encapsulation or containerization, because in the single image you will have all of them bundled. And when it comes to Docker container, it is nothing but it is running instance of a Docker image. Like for example, if you give life to Docker image, then it will become Docker container, right? because it is the running instance of a Docker image. And Docker engine is nothing but it's an open source containerization technology for building and containerizing your applications. Basically, it provides a runtime to have your containers running or not. So this is the primary difference between different Docker terms. Now let's see what is Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is nothing but it's a system for running and coordinating containerized applications across a cluster of machines. Basically, it's a management tool to orchestrate different containers, right? So it's a platform designed to completely manage the lifecycle of the containerized applications. So it sits on top of the Docker because Docker hosts the different containers. That's the base technology, and on top of that we need Kubernetes to manage and orchestrate different containers. Now let's see the Kubernetes architecture at a high level. So it has a UI which we call Kubernetes dashboards, and it has also the CLI, which is a command line interface. And in the Kubernetes architecture we have a Kubernetes master, and this takes care of managing different nodes, right? And on different nodes we have different containers running on each node. Okay, so let's see the architecture in a detailed way in the next slide. So here you can see it's a Kubernetes architecture where you have the interface UI and CLI, and you have the Kubernetes master. This takes care of different containers running on different nodes. For example, here I showed node 1, node 2. When we look deeper into a node has different pods, and in each pod you have different containers, and all of them running on a Docker engine. And if you see node 1 and node 2, so they have their own Docker engine. So Docker engine, it's a runtime which facilitates running Docker containers on top of it. Okay, and to know what is pod is nothing but it's a logical grouping of different containers. Okay, for example, similar containers I can group it together and keep it in a pod so that they interact with each other to facilitate its own functionality, separate functionality. For example, pod 2, it has only one container. Pod 3, it has two containers. So this is the Kubernetes architecture in detail. So coming to the end, we have gone through the different Docker terms, and we mentioned that Docker is nothing but it's an underlying technology which helps in running the containers, and Kubernetes, it's a management or orchestration tool to manage different Docker containers. And this environment or infrastructure will be provided by Google Cloud Platform or AWS in the cloud environment. Okay. So to know more about Docker and Kubernetes, you can go through these websites which helps in understanding Docker and Kubernetes in more detail.